on how we learn nowadays, because as we all know, learning doesn't stop at the end of the school. It goes on through the whole life. Okay, let's see if I can have a look at the full screen so you see a bit more. Yeah, it should be here. We go to the next slide. Oh, I have to shift the, so here it goes. Yeah, the menu is here. I hope you can see. That's my next slide. Well, we start here. That's all we know. That's the formal art of education, how we are used to learn at school, sitting together, having the opportunity to interact to each other, having the opportunity also to follow up things, to interchange. I have to move this part. I cannot go through the slides like that. Something does not work so properly. So I think the point is I have no access to my slides, to one part of my slides. So something is wrong with Zoom. 1 second. Now it works. Yeah, it's fine. I have to move the bar away. Okay, that's how we know education. And actually, nowadays, it already shifted, because the way I am having lectures today is a bit different. The only thing I see is logos from screens, from the backsides, and students are actually learning in presence, synchronously with me. But actually, this education already shifted a bit. Namely, they have access to a lot of information which is not really related to what I'm saying. And there is a lot of research showing that actually around 30% of all the students which are attending a lecture, like I'm giving many times every week, 30% are not there. They are doing other things. That means actually they are enhancing what I'm talking to other things. Either they have a split attention, they do something else, or they try to take notes, or they have additional information about what I'm saying. They're checking if what I'm saying is true. So this is a shift that already happens in the formal education, presential and synchronous in the lecture hall. But of course, what I'm trying to talk about today is rather this point, this way of education, the digital education, which is actually not presential. And to a certain extent, it is also not synchronous. And to a certain extent, it's not relied to a specific place to learn and not relied to a specific time to learn. In fact, that may happen also here with us. I don't know how many people are listening online and live here, but I'm sure that all this session will be recorded, so people can learn also tonight, or learn tomorrow, or listen to it in a couple of weeks. They can listen to it in a bus, they can listen to it at school, they can listen to it at home, or while they're having a conversation with somebody else. So this is a shift that happens. And now let's have a look at about the concepts of formal and formats of traditional formal online education. So I'm talking about traditional, which means how many people, many educated things that traditional education works. Actually, the core thing of formal, traditional online education is, first of all, information transmission. That means I am talking, or the teacher is talking, and the audience, the learners, they are listening. That means actually there's a transmission of what I think is important related to that topic and what I am supposed the students to learn. A second step, which is not really mandatory, you have some sort of interaction, questions. You may ask questions to me or whatever, to the tutors, or you have some opportunity to have some forums to ask, to talk about problems you have. And then at the end of the formal education, you usually have a sort of assessment. So these are the 2 or 3 core elements of traditional formal online education. So it's different than what we have actually in a formal presential education when we go at school. And this shift implies different changings also in our behavior. If we have a look at the strength of formal presential education, of course we have the opportunity to have some information transmission, like you see this women sitting there, and probably a teacher or a tutor is giving them some information the way I'm doing now, but it's in presence. On the other hand, in presential education, you have also some other elements where you can have presential, synchronous social interaction, which is collaboration. Potentially, you can have also some concept exchange. So we talk about the learning topic in presence, and there not only we by the mean of the teacher and the students, but by the mean of the students among each other. And this is relevant for conceptual change. If you start from if you think that learning takes place not only by information transmission, but conceptual understanding and conceptual change. So that happens in presential education usually. And it happens during the lesson, but it can also happen just after the lesson or before of the lessons, which usually in formal online education doesn't take place. You go to a lesson and then you go on to your program, you look after the kids, or you continue with the work, or you go for lunch at home because you're already home. So this is the difference. Another difference, I think for deep understanding and for conceptual learning, it is crucial to have the opportunity to argue, to exchange arguments, to exchange opinions, to negotiate about opinions, and also to resolve conflicts. And this element takes place usually also in formal, synchronous, presential education. And both elements I mentioned now, like group work, interaction, argumentation, negotiation, conflict resolution, usually don't take place in formal presential education, or at least it don't take place in how many people understand digital non-presential education. This is one thing which really changes. So let's have a look now. We know the weaknesses of formal presential education. Let's have a look at the strengths of formal online learning or formal online education. Actually, there are some strengths. If it comes to information transmission and enhancing factual knowledge means learn facts, learn, as I made an example here, learn vocabulary for a language. There it is very effective to learn online, as it is effective to have the lesson presential offline. But this way of enhancing factual skills, factual knowledge, can be done either presential or online in the same effective way. The advantage of having it online is the scalability. If you are doing it presential at school, you have a lecture hall which may take 300, 400 people at the same time. If you do it online, potentially with a link, you can reach 1 million of people, and you can transmit and they can acquire this factual knowledge. This is a big advantage or a strength of online education. Another point which can be transmitted or which can be learned very effectively are specific types of procedures. Here I have an example of how to learn to code, to write program codes. This procedure can be also taught very effectively online, as it can be taught as well, of course, offline and in presential education, but there is a strength of formal online learning. But there are also weaknesses, and these weaknesses, and of course, please consider, we are thinking about behavioral change. If we have strengths and weaknesses, this implies that we try to adapt, to cope with that strengths and weaknesses, and our behavior will adapt accordingly. So one weakness is the potential of isolation, social isolation especially. I think you are aware that a lot of universities, they propose many online courses, and their students can learn from home, anytime, any place, but from home alone. So the social interaction which happens before and after the lesson and also during the lesson is away. So if you have like a specific social environment, you have a family, I am a father, I have kids and I look after the kids. So I am there, I can have my university degree, that's perfect. But on the other hand, I stay at home and I remain at home. And then that may have some disadvantages because I don't have the opportunity to interchange directly with my peers, which is relevant. On the other hand, it's much more difficult to interchange directly. It means like to negotiate, to argumentate, to resolve conflicts related to the topic you want to learn, which really is not favorable for having conceptual change in learning, for having deep learning opportunities. This is a weakness of traditional formal online learning. So that's a point which has to be considered. So now what happens? Do we have a question here? Let me just see the chat. Oh. Yes. Okay, we have question 2, actually. I go back to this question. I think I will have a look at that in my session at the end. So I will go forward with that. So I will come back to these questions. I won't forget it also. So the thing is, actually, I go on with that and come to the question later. The shift from presential to online may really change the perception of what is important in learning, because this facts like information transmission and factual knowledge acquisition is done so often, you may perceive that in learning this is relevant, and these factors like group work, interaction, social negotiation, argumentation, the perception of the importance decreases, which means we are aware of that, and actually we think it's not so important because the other things are taught, the other methods are used. And that is something which leads to a change of behavior, of understanding of what learning is, and also of change of or increasing of skills and of competencies, which are rather in these elements and not in the other element. The other thing, on the other hand, we have another part which is very relevant, which is actually not the formal learning setting, which is at school, which is in the university or primary, secondary school or high school, but is outside of school. Informal or non-formal learning actually is something which has a very big importance. Actually, there's literature showing that about 5% of what we know has been taught as a school, and 95% around is learned outside of a formal educational setting. So which means we have learning or education which takes part in a formal setting, and now if it shifts to online with this focus I described before, and a big part of learning which takes place not in a formal setting. And there we have different learning habits. We have less information transmission, but we have rather a lot of other types of learning, like we have here using, for instance, social media, not only for just chatting with my neighbor, not only for posting on Facebook, but also for expressing myself, for proposing content in my blog, for doing videos on YouTube, for gaming. Gamification is relevant, a very important element, and not only for ego shooter games, but also for other games which are constructive and relevant. So social media and all the tools related to this broader sense of social media also have a big impact on how learning takes place, but not in a formal, but in an informal way. And actually, this is a potential, of course, if you have the access through COVID. The access if you have the technology, if you have the connection. And to that, I will come a bit later on. So social media, if you see the tools, the most used tools in Europe are totally different than the most used tools in other parts of the world. That's one thing I wanted to show. So this actually, if you look at our kids, especially if they have connection, they work with all these tools. And of course, they learn. Some of them rather not, depending on what they're doing. But of course, there are skills which are promoted, and especially if they become really like also content creators by creating a TikTok video about what their hobbies are, or by creating a photo shooting of their Instagram hobbies, or by having a page on Facebook or Reddit or on many others, on Blogger. This is something which is actually also related to concept development and also can help for deep learning elements. Of course, there's difference about how the gender work. That's why I'm mentioning, I've shown this slide here. Usually women perceive the interaction with social media a little bit differently than men do. Especially men are more related to finding information, to having textual interchange, to interact in forums. Women it's generalized, of course, but the tendency on that, they rather rely on visual platforms, and of course they interchange rather. There they discuss rather personal issues, and men, obviously, in this research, they showed that they're really discussing rather about abstract topics, while women rely more on emotions, emoticons, and men usually interchange longer words, and so on and so forth. So there are differences, but all these elements are relevant for our behavior and also our learning behavior. Okay, I come to the take home, and then we can go to the question and answer. I think I still have a couple of minutes left. So one thing is, once we have the opportunity of having the technology, having the connectivity, and having also the time and the social environment allowing us to work online, there are some elements which are favorable for formal online education, and there are some elements that are not so favorable. I will make a distinction between formal education and informal education. So online education is very effective and very good for information transmission and for procedural knowledge acquisition. So there will be a shift of these elements, of these skills, which are promoted through the online education. On the other hand, formal education, online education is not so favorable for social interactions and for collaboration and problem solving. We don't have to forget informal education, where there is a huge opportunity, a lot of tools, for a myriad of tools for interchanging, for expressing themselves, for argumentation, for negotiation. So there is a deep potential for also trying to have these deep learning opportunities. And of course, there is a danger of addiction and of course, a lack of real social contact. So the thing is, actually, we should try, if we want to optimize the online learning, the two things should be combined, having the information transmission, but also not neglecting the other things. So these elements, I think, are relevant for our behavioral change. And that's for my input. But now we come back to the relevant questions. I think I go to the chat, if you agree. And there, have a look at the question which has been posed. We have 3 questions. Oh, let's hear the first question. I think it's about, let me see. Online education gained global importance after the pandemic. Can we say that a new era in education has begun, even if the pandemic loses its effects? Yes, I totally agree with you. There will be a shift, and I hope really that we try to combine the information transmission part with also elements which allow us to have more social interaction, conflict resolution, argumentation, negotiation, and this can be embedded. And if this happens, we will keep the information transmission, which, by the way, is boring during the presential education, combine that, so have these elements of information transmission done electronically, over digital tools, and then trying to, once we are together, learning in the same room at the same time, to enhance these elements which lead to deep learning, deep understanding, conceptual learning. So I think this will be a change happening, and I hope, that's a hope, that we will go in the direction that this may happen in this way. Second question. Is it being currently debated that children do not have equal opportunities in online education, and that online education has the discriminatory and unfair nature? What would you like to tell us about that? Yes, I agree with that as well. There are researches showing that in Germany, I've read some research in Germany where you have quite a good coverage of technology and network, where students, pupils, kids, which at home don't have support from the family, they are left behind. So even there, when the technology and networking is done, there is differences. There are differences. So kids which are living in a I would say normal or good social environment at home, they have better chances. So actually, there's a danger that the gap between students, learners which don't have the same chances will become bigger. Of course, I'm not talking about all the students which don't even have access to technology. I'm working actually in a project in the Philippines where through pandemic, students, they don't have any connection and any technology, which means the teachers are demanding printers so they can print out the textbook and deliver the textbook by motorbike. So you see this even the gap gets even bigger related to that. So I totally agree, there will be some discrimination. And this, we have to be very careful that, of course, this gap doesn't really get bigger, and try to really permit all an equal access to technology and an equal support for learning through the pandemic and also after the pandemic. Third questions, online education reduces the quality of educational content. Well, that's also a matter of how you teach. If you have a bad teacher, the content which is educated is bad. So I had bad teachers and I had good teachers in presence. And I think if you prepare the content in an appropriate way online, in addition to what you talk, trying to add with media, presentation or interaction, then the information transmission part online can be as good as the information transmission part, which is done presential offline. But of course, there are big differences. And I think most of the people here, they went through an academic career, or many of them. So you see that actually, if you went at university, you had so bad lectures that you could say, oh no, I could have stayed at home and read the book. But on the other hand, you have so inspiring lectures that you can say, oh yes, I could never have catched up this inspiration and this motivation for my further career. So, well, that's my question about that. Malek, I hope I could answer your question. So I think if there is one more minutes, I can take another question if there are. Oh, there has been another question posted now. Let me see. Maybe now, yeah, let me see if there's another question popping up. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a fourth question. Yeah. Are open and distance education forms for formal education or informal education? Melek, another question. I'm not so sure whether I understand it properly. Well, there are methods and didactical settings and concepts which combine actually like what we understand as formal online education and non-formal settings. So if you look, I don't talk about, I talk about a specific way of MOOCs, which is actually not the X MOOCs where you have the information transmission and the assessment. There are also other types of MOOCs where the interaction and the networking is relevant in the education. And there you combine a bit these two ways of learning by not transmitting, but trying to create network, to communicate and also interact. And this is something which actually may really be like a sort of a mixture of the two things. Increasing the quality of digital education. Well, well, that's actually the fifth question. Do you think we should work on increasing the quality of digital education? Well, for sure, I'm an educator and it has to go on. But what does it mean to increase? And I think I showed you a bit what I think is important, where the way should go toward really like educational method, digital online educational method, which foster deep learning, conceptual change, which is done by collaboration, cooperation, and all these elements. So this is the way it should go. And unfortunately, this is the expensive way of online education because it needs some tutoring, it needs some support, as it is done also in formal presential education.
Professor Notari, thank you for your speech, for your presentation, and answering our questions, our audience's questions, and wonderful remarks. So we can move on to other guests after this session, dear guests. And thank you again, Professor Notari, for your enlightening speech. Bye for now.
Goodbye and have a nice conference. Thank you very much for inviting me. And if you have any questions, you have my email. They can reach me anytime. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And I'm looking forward for the next speaker. Have a nice day.
Thank you.